Okay, now let's talk about the biodiversity in Amazonia. First of all, we should mention the origins of Amazonian diversity, of tropical forest diversity in general, but Amazonian diversity in particular. That's a very hotly debated topic in the literature. We could spend probably months here talking about it. So I'm just going to mention some general insights into that. Of course, it's a complex mixture of many different factors, okay? We can talk about abiotic factors or factors that are not related to the living world. So the climate, the soils, the physical features of the landscape. This is all about abiotic factors, but that has an importance on the number of species that live in a place, and also the biotic factors. So the relationships among organisms, so predators, prey, and consumers, and parasites, and all of those competition, predation, all of the ecological interactions among species within the environment also are fundamental for that. And then you have a combination also of evolutionary and ecological factors driving diversity. So you have long-term evolutionary factors allowing the number of species to increase over evolutionary time, and also ecological factors allowing the number of species to be high in ecological terms. So in a given place, in a given area, given the relationship among organisms, okay? One of the key factors in diversity is size. Larger areas have more room for more species. So we have what we call species area relation. So larger areas have more species. So the Amazon is a large area, so you can fit a lot of species there. The solar energy on the equator is also a factor that might be related to that. So you have more photosynthesis, so the conversion of CO2 into oxygen using the light of the sun, right? And also availability of water. You know, as we saw, there's a lot of water in the Amazon, so that water is the main ingredient for life and diversity. For a very long period, people thought that stability was the main driver of the diversity in tropical forests, including Amazonia. So a stable place that doesn't change much would be building up species and species and species and become very diverse. But then instability was claimed as one of the reasons for the diversity, because instability brings new factors, new environments, new challenges to the species, and they are forced to evolve. So you have instability driving change, evolution, and speciation. Okay, and one of a popular theory was established in the late 1960s about the forest refuges based on the glacial forest refuges in the northern hemisphere. So those areas that were not frozen during the glacial periods. Jürgen Hafer and other scientists proposed that tropical forests in the Amazon were actually restricted to small patches of refuges in the last glacial maximum during the Pleistocene, surrounded by dry areas such as like a savanna-like area or even a grasslands. And so that would force species to contract and then speciate within these refuges. Okay, this idea was very popular, but then in the 70s, especially in the 1980s, but then from the 1990s and 2000s onward, it became less important, because especially geologists and also molecular biologists realized that the diversity of Amazonia is a lot older than the Pleistocene climatic fluctuations, the last 2-3 million years. So most of the species were older than that. So then the current idea is that a combination of geological features like mountains, rivers, marine incursions, as we saw in the previous episode, and also climatic changes, but not in the context of refuge, that drove the diversity. Okay, and also forest structure and complexity is also an important factor that we'll see soon. So this diagram here summarizes the age of the biome. So older places have more species because you have more time to build up species. Then, so you have speciation rate, immigration rate, extinction rate, contributing to the number of species, to the species diversity. So the number of immigration events, species that come from another place to the Amazon, species that originate there, and you have to take into account the extinction also occurs. Okay. You have organismal traits like the niche, that the species occupies, the dispersal ability, and their evolution. Okay, and then you have environmental drivers, like I said, environmental gradients, differences in the landscape, in the habitat, the area, the distribution of biomes and land masses, fragmentation, biotic interactions, etc. So it's a complex mix of factors that drove Amazonian diversity to what it is today. And this has been going on for millions of years, for at least 10 million years, as we can see. Regardless, Amazonia is the primary source of neotropical biodiversity. So the neotropical region is the region from Mexico to the not to the whole south of South America, but to the Patagonian steppe here. And this is called the neotropical region, the new tropics. Okay, as opposed to the old tropics in Africa, for instance. And this paper here shows that Amazonia is the source of diversity for the other areas, even for distant areas. Usually it's the source to adjacent areas, but so here you have the Amazon as a major source for instance, for the Atlantic forest, 441 shifts. So lineages that went from the Amazonia to the Atlantic forest, to Mesoamerica, to the forests in Mesoamerica, also to the Cerrado, okay? So you see all of them, even to the Caatinga, which is a very different biome, like a dry biome. The West Indies, okay? Some species came from the Amazon to the West Indies. There's Andean grasslands, and so forth. So it's a primary source. Most species originated. Some species came from other places to Amazonia. So some from Mesoamerica, for instance, others from the Atlantic forest. But Amazonia is a major exporter of biodiversity. Talking about forest structure, especially when you think about the primary forest, what's a primary forest? It's a forest that's pristine, that hasn't been modified or for a long time. So it's an old growth forest that's been there without without significant human impact for many years. Okay, so you have a really complex structure of layers. You have like 4 or 5 layers or even more. This is a typical 4-layered structure. The forest floor, okay, what we call the understory, which is this first layer above the ground of small trees. Then you have the canopy, okay, which is the kind of the dominant top of the forest, but you have emergent trees, okay, so there's the emergent layer. So you have some really tall trees, more than 50 meters high, reaching up to, I think the record is in the Amazon is like almost 90 meters of height and sticking out above the canopy, okay? And then you have some typical animals, macaws, harpy eagle here, sloths and toucan in the canopy. In the understory, you have bats, have hummingbirds, right? And the forest floor, you have lots of insects, beetles and anteaters. And also you have the water, right? And you have the underground. Also some species are subterranean. So the emergent trees have, between 50 and 80 meters. And then this complex structure, kind of a 3D architecture, allows the species to coexist, okay? Because one is in like, it's like an apartment building, right? Where you have several floors, and if there's people living in the top floor here, so you can pack more people. That's kind of the same idea. You can pack more species if you have a tall structure with many layers, okay? And even that, you have very tall trees in the northern hemisphere in temperate forests, but you don't have many layers. Usually you have trees that are they're not connected to the neighbor trees, and you don't have that many layers, along the forest strata. Okay, so that's a big difference. And even in Southeast Asian tropical forests, you don't have that much connection between the canopy and the understory, and lots of vines and tangled lianas. That creates a very complex architecture. There's also interdependence among organisms, such as especially plants and animals. For example, pollinators. In temperate areas, most flowering plants are pollinated by the wind, whereas in tropical forests, they're pollinated by animals, insects, birds, and mammals, bats. You have also seed dispersers, so animals that eat the fruit and disperse the seed away from the tree, for example. You have epiphytes, plants that grow on top of others, such as bromeliads. Bromeliads are like this water tanks. And then within each water tank, you have a microcosmos, a micro community of insects and frogs and other organisms that live around that little pond. That's sometimes it could be up in the tree in the canopy, it could be on the ground. So there's many places for those bromeliads. And also you have competition and cooperation going on in the forest. So you have the competition between animals, or between animals and plants might drive like what we call arms race, right? So you try to get better, and then the other tries to get better, and then they both go in this competition, and this competition may drive diversity. Okay, you have to diversify to avoid competition. For example, if you have one place, think about it. Maybe you have think about a profession, right? You have a profession. If you have too many people, if you're like an engineer, if you have too many engineers, you're gonna be out of job. Okay, so you have to do something else to be useful. So that happens to nature. So species have to if there's too many individuals of that species doing, you don't have resources for everybody. So you got to do something different. And then throughout evolution, species develop those different abilities, evolve different abilities, and change their niche, and that allows for diversification and allows for species to build up. Okay, and sometimes when the species evolves, the evolution of one species forces the evolution of another, or that's called coevolution. So species co-evolve and diversify together. That's an interesting phenomenon. This is the structure that we've seen before. So this is like a várzea forest, a flooded forest of Whitewater River. You have terra firme, which is non-flooded. Have the Igapó, which is a blackwater flooded forest. Campinas, which are more simple than the layered structure of the primary forests, and also palm swamps. You have some bamboo dominated areas. We have different micro environments, but most of the Amazon would be either terra firme, várzea, or Igapó forest. In terms of diversity of plants, here you have some numbers just to give an idea. If we think about only the lowland rainforest, so below 1,000 meters of elevation, so just the lowlands, you have 14,000 seed plant species, so plants that produce seeds, okay, which are basically the largest, usually the largest plants. Of these 14,000, almost 7,000 are trees. Okay, but more than half of them are not trees. Trees are species that have the trunk has more than 10 centimeters of diameter at the breast height. So it's 48%. So the rest of most of them are actually herbs, shrubs, epiphytes, like plants that grow on top of another plant, climbers, vines, and this kind of thing. And these 14,000 species are distributed in almost 1,800 genera and almost 200 different families, okay? And people actually counted the number of trees in the Amazon forest. Of course, they didn't count all of the trees, but they counted trees in many what we call plots. Like these dots here are sampling plots where scientists counted and identified the trees, all the trees within a small area. And they extrapolated the number of trees for the whole region to 390 billion trees. That's the approximate number of trees in the Amazon. And they figured out that among all the species, among the thousands and thousands of species, 227 species are hyperdominant. So these 227 species represent half of all the trees. Okay, of all 390 billion trees belong to these 227 hyperdominant species, which is just 1.4% of the species, but they dominate the landscape, okay? And the rarest 11,000 species are just 0.1% of all the trees. So you have a skewed distribution with a few hyperdominant species. This is questionable. Some scientists have questioned that. They argue that this hyperdominant species might be very often more than one species, like a species complex that hasn't been described yet, hasn't been detected and described yet. But anyway, that gives you an idea. These are some highlights, some of the plants that are typical of the Amazon forest. The Brazil nut tree, Castanheira, which is beautiful. It's like one of the most beautiful trees I've ever seen. It's really tall, 50 meters, way up, emergent in primary forest, a really massive trunk. It's a very important economically because of the Brazil nut that's collected, and it falls and it's collected. You don't have to cut the tree to get the Brazil nut. The fruits fall, and then you get just the fruit with the seeds. Cocoa, chocolate, for chocolate lovers, it's the cocoa, which grows from the trunk of the cocoa tree. It's also an important crop. It grows in the understory, in the shade of the tallest trees, and it needs that shade to grow. The heliconia flower, which is very typical, the passion fruit flower, typical of there. The acai palm, it's a palm tree, very important economically as well. It's been cultivated for thousands and thousands of years in the Amazon, and now it's important economically because it was discovered by the industry as a very energetic food, and it's used for food in the Amazon for like I said, for thousands of years. And but in urban areas in Brazil and abroad, people used it as for juice, smoothies, and ice cream. It's very popular. The water lily, which is kind of a symbol of the Amazon, these giant round leaves floating on the water. Orchids, very diverse, very beautiful. And the rubber tree, which also was a major driver of development in the Amazon in the late 1900s, the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. Ivia brasiliensis. That's you cut the tree and the latex runs through this collector here. Some animals, I work on mammals, so I'll probably have a biased view here. We'll show probably more mammals than other groups. The Amazonian manatee, freshwater manatee. There's the Florida manatee, the saltwater manatee, but this is a freshwater manatee in the Amazon River. The river dolphins, typical of whitewaters. The Amazon River dolphin, it's a pink color, beautiful. Cock of the rock, the Rupicula rupicula, which is also very famous Amazonian bird, beautiful. The famous giant anaconda, this big tree predator, semi-aquatic, swims really well and it reaches really large sizes. This is the mata kellos, which is this really weird river turtle, typical of the Amazon as well. The bald wakari, very typical, an endangered species. The Saguinus imperator, also endangered, with this long mustache in the Western Amazon. And the beautiful pirarucu, the very large fish, can reach 1.1 meter, 1.5 meters easily. A very tasty fish from the rivers of the Amazon. Okay, when we look at patterns of plant and animal diversity, there's a very clear trend towards more diversity in Western Amazon, in the western part of the Amazon, as you approach the Andean region. Okay, so for instance, for trees, the darker here, the more diversity you have. So you see that there's a trend here towards especially in Peru, northern Peru, and Ecuador, and southern Colombia and western Brazil. So this area here has highest tree diversity. There are some other places here, but this stands out here to the west. The fish diversity, those are sub-basins within the Amazon, is also higher here, and that's kind of this is not what's expected, because since the river flows to the east, it was expected that you have more species to the east than to the west, because it would be easier to move toward the east than the opposite. So, but you have more diversity, and especially the endemicity, you have more endemisms in the western region, a lot more. So the western half of the Amazon, species only occur there, and the eastern half, you have more common species that occur there, but not only there. The same is true for the terrestrial vertebrates, so birds. You have more diversity here in the Western Amazon, also here along the river. Mammals, northwestern, and then especially in the Eastern Amazon. Amphibians, clear trend towards the Eastern Amazon, towards the Western Amazon again. So 85, the highest number of species is 136 at a given place, okay? 60-37 of mammals in a single place, not in a place, but in a square, and 1,700 bird species in this pixel, okay? So that shows you that the western part of the Amazon is the most diverse when you compare. The whole Amazon is diverse, very diverse, but the western part has more diversity than the eastern part for most of the organisms. All right.